Germans mocked Britain's obsolete biplane, until one torpedo sent the Bismarck to its doom. Part 1, The Obsolete Squadron. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stood at attention in the briefing room of HMS Ark Royal, her hands clasped behind her back as the men around her snickered. At 24 years old, she was one of the few women serving in the Fleet Air Arm in 1941, and she felt every dismissive glance like a physical blow. "Gentlemen and Miss Mitchell," Commander Hayes began, his tone making it clear which category didn't quite belong. "We've received intelligence that the German battleship Bismarck has broken out into the Atlantic. She's the most powerful warship ever built, and she's hunting our convoys." Sarah's heart quickened. She'd heard about the Bismarck. Everyone had. The massive ship was a floating fortress, armed with guns that could sink any British vessel from miles away. Just 3 days ago, the Bismarck had destroyed HMS Hood, Britain's pride and joy, in less than 10 minutes. 1,400 men had died in that cold water. "Our job," Hayes continued, "is to slow her down until the fleet can catch up. We'll be using the Swordfish." A collective groan filled the room. Sarah felt it too, though she kept her face neutral. The ferry Swordfish was a torpedo bomber that looked like it belonged in a museum, not a modern war. It was a biplane, 2 wings stacked on top of each other, covered in fabric, with an open cockpit that left crews exposed to wind, rain, and enemy fire. The plane was so slow that newer fighter aircraft had trouble not overshooting it. "Permission to speak, sir," said Lieutenant Parker, a pilot who'd made his opinion of female officers abundantly clear since Sarah's arrival. "Are we really expected to attack the Bismarck in those antiques? The Germans will laugh us out of the sky." "The Swordfish is what we have, Lieutenant," Hayes replied sharply, "and it's proven effective against Italian battleships at Taranto." "The Italians," Parker muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not exactly the same as going up against German gunners, is it?" Sarah bit her tongue. She'd heard this argument before. The Swordfish had indeed struck the Italian fleet at Taranto Harbor 6 months earlier, but that had been a surprise attack against anchored ships. The Bismarck would be moving, shooting back, and protected by some of the best anti-aircraft guns in the world. After the briefing ended, Sarah made her way to the hangar deck. The carrier pitched and rolled beneath her feet as North Atlantic swells battered the hull. She could hear the wind howling outside, and she knew the weather was deteriorating fast. She found her aircraft, Swordfish L for London, being prepared by the ground crew. Chief Petty Officer Thompson looked up as she approached. He was one of the few men aboard who treated her like any other pilot. "She's ready for you, Lieutenant," he said, patting the fabric-covered fuselage. "Fresh torpedo loaded, all systems checked." "Thank you, Chief." Sarah ran her hand along the lower wing. Up close, the Swordfish looked even more antiquated. The fabric covering rippled slightly in the draft from the hangar opening. This was supposed to attack a modern battleship. "Don't let them get to you," Thompson said quietly. "I've seen these old girls do impossible things." "Have you seen one sink a battleship that's shooting back?" Thompson was silent for a moment. "No, ma'am, I haven't, but I've seen brave people do impossible things when they have to." Sarah nodded, appreciating his honesty. She climbed up to inspect the cockpit. The instruments were basic: airspeed, altitude, compass, fuel gauge. No radar, no radio direction finding, no heated cabin. Just a pilot, an observer, and a gunner, flying by sight and courage into whatever hell awaited them. That evening, Sarah sat in the officers' mess, picking at her dinner. The other pilots were gathered at the far end of the table, their voices carrying clearly. "I heard Mitchell's never even flown in combat," Parker was saying. "She's only here because the brass wanted to look progressive." "Probably crack under pressure," another voice added. "Women aren't built for this kind of thing, too emotional." Sarah set down her fork carefully. She could confront them, but what would that prove? She'd been fighting this battle since she first put on the uniform. Her father, a Royal Navy captain, had pulled strings to get her into flight training, and she'd graduated top of her class. But none of that mattered to men like Parker. To them, she would always be an outsider, a novelty, a woman playing at being a warrior. Her observer and gunner, Sub-Lieutenant James Crawford and leading airman Robert Hayes, slid into the seats across from her. Crawford was 32, a quiet man with steady hands and sharp eyes. Hayes was just 19, earnest and eager. "Don't listen to them, ma'am," Hayes said immediately. "They're just scared." "Scared of me?" Sarah asked with a slight smile. "Scared of the Bismarck," Crawford corrected. We all are, but taking it out on you is easier than admitting they're terrified. Sarah appreciated their loyalty. She'd been assigned to them 2 months ago, and they'd flown together on patrol missions and training exercises. Crawford never questioned her orders, and Hayes treated her with the same respect he'd show any officer. "What do you think our chances are?" she asked them quietly. Crawford considered the question carefully. The Bismarck is fast, heavily armored, and she's got anti-aircraft guns that can put up a wall of steel. We'll be flying slow, low, and visible. The weather might help. If it's bad enough, their gunners can't aim as well. But if it's too bad, we can't aim either, Hayes added. Exactly, Crawford said. We need the weather to be just bad enough, not too calm, not too rough, and we need to get lucky. Luck, Sarah had never been comfortable relying on luck. She believed in training, skill, preparation. But Crawford was right. Against something like the Bismarck, they would need luck too. Later that night, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk, listening to the carrier groan and creak around her. She thought about her mother, who'd begged her not to join up. War is no place for a young woman, she'd said. Sarah had argued that war was no place for anyone, but someone had to fight it. She thought about all the people who doubted her, who'd said women couldn't handle the stress of combat flying. Part of her wanted to prove them wrong so badly it hurt. But another part knew that this wasn't about proving anything. 1,400 men had died when the hood went down. If the Bismarck wasn't stopped, thousands more would die. Merchant sailors, naval crews, maybe even civilians if German surface raiders made it close enough to British shores. This wasn't about her pride or Parker's prejudice. This was about stopping a weapon of war before it killed more people. The next morning, the call came. The Bismarck had been spotted by a reconnaissance plane. She was heading southeast, trying to reach the safety of French ports where German air cover could protect her. The British fleet was converging, but they needed the Bismarck slowed down. That meant the Swordfish. Sarah dressed carefully, putting on her flight suit and Mee West life preserver. She knew the statistics. The water temperature in the North Atlantic was 42 degrees Fahrenheit. A person could survive perhaps 30 minutes before hypothermia killed them. That was if the impact didn't kill you first, and if you got out of the aircraft, and if you inflated your life vest properly. She pushed those thoughts aside. Fear was natural, but it couldn't be allowed to interfere with the mission. On the flight deck, the wind nearly knocked her over. The carrier was steaming into the gale, and waves crashed over the bow, sending spray across the deck. The Swordfish were lined up, their fabric coverings snapping in the wind. Commander Hayes appeared, shouting to be heard over the storm. Weather's at the limit of what we can operate in. The Bismarck is 90 miles northwest. You'll be flying in rain, low visibility, heavy seas. Questions. Sarah had 100 questions, but none that mattered now. She shook her head. Then good luck and good hunting. She climbed into her cockpit, Crawford settling in behind her, Hayes manning the rear gun. The engine coughed to life, and Sarah felt the familiar vibration of the Bristol Pegasus radial engine. Around her, other Swordfish were starting up, their propellers becoming invisible discs in the gray morning. This was it. This was what all the training, all the arguments, all the doubt had been leading to. She was about to fly an obsolete biplane into the teeth of the most powerful warship in the world. And everyone expected her to fail. The takeoff was brutal. Sarah pushed the throttle forward and the Swordfish lumbered down the pitching deck of HMS Ark Royal. The carrier rose on a swell, then dropped, and for a heart-stopping moment, Sarah thought they wouldn't make it. Then the biplane clawed its way into the air, barely clearing the wave crests that reached up like grasping fingers. She fought the controls as wind buffeted the aircraft. Rain lashed against her goggles, and within seconds she was soaked. Behind her, Crawford tapped her shoulder and pointed to the compass, helping her maintain course. There were no radios working in this weather. The storm created too much interference. They would have to navigate by dead reckoning and hope they found their target. The squadron formed up as best they could, 15 Swordfish struggling through the storm. Sarah could barely see the aircraft on either side of her through the rain and mist. The clouds were so low they were almost touching the wave tops, and visibility was measured in yards, not miles. This was actually good news. If they could barely see, the Bismarck's gunners would have trouble seeing them too. The weather that made flying so dangerous might be the only thing that kept them alive long enough to attack. They flew for 40 minutes, buffeted by wind, blinded by rain, trusting their instruments and their calculations. Sarah's arms ached from fighting the controls. The swordfish might be slow, but it was also temperamental in heavy weather, requiring constant corrections to maintain course and altitude. Then Crawford tapped her shoulder urgently and pointed ahead. Through a break in the clouds, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. The Bismarck. Even from miles away, the battleship was terrifying. She was enormous, over 800 feet long, cutting through the heavy seas like they were nothing. Her massive guns pointed skyward, and Sarah could see the flash of smaller anti-aircraft weapons along her superstructure. The squadron leader's aircraft waggled its wings, the signal to begin the attack run. The swordfish spread out, approaching from different angles to split the Bismarck's defensive fire. Sarah took her assigned position on the port side, dropping even lower until she was barely 50 feet above the wave tops. Her mouth was dry, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was nothing like training. This was real, and that ship ahead could kill her in 100 different ways. The Bismarck's guns opened up. The sky erupted in black puffs of smoke as anti-aircraft shells detonated around them. Heavier guns fired, their shells hitting the water and sending up enormous geysers. Sarah threw the swordfish into a skidding turn, nearly clipping a wave crest. A shell burst so close she felt the aircraft shake from the concussion. "Steady," Crawford shouted from behind her. "I need a steady run for the torpedo." Sarah gritted her teeth and straightened out, flying directly at the Bismarck's side. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away, to climb, to do anything except fly straight at that wall of fire. She could see tracer rounds now, streams of glowing bullets reaching out for her aircraft. The Germans were firing everything they had. A swordfish to her right took a direct hit. The aircraft simply disintegrated, pieces of fabric and metal spinning into the sea. Sarah caught a glimpse of a body falling, and then it was gone, swallowed by the gray water. "Hold steady," Crawford called. 3 more seconds." The Bismarck filled her vision now. She could see German sailors on the deck, see the officers on the bridge, see the massive gun turrets tracking her movement. The ship was turning, trying to present its narrow bow to make a harder target. "Release," Crawford shouted. Sarah felt the aircraft lift as the torpedo dropped away. She immediately threw the swordfish into a violent turn, banking so hard she thought the wings might tear off. Behind her, Hayes was firing the rear gun, the chattering sound almost lost in the storm and the explosions. She didn't look back to see if their torpedo hit. Her only thought was survival, getting away from that ship and its deadly guns. She flew through smoke and spray, dodging debris and other aircraft, her hands moving on instinct because there was no time to think. Then they were through, racing away from the Bismarck at the swordfish's maximum speed of 140 miles per hour, which suddenly felt impossibly slow. She could still see the black puffs of anti-aircraft fire behind them, still hear the rumble of the battleship's guns. "Are we hit?" she shouted back to Crawford. "I don't think so," he called back, "but I saw at least 3 aircraft go down." 3 crews, 18 men, probably dead already in that freezing water. Sarah felt sick, but she couldn't afford to think about that now. She had to get her crew home. The flight back to HMS Ark Royal was a nightmare of its own. The storm had worsened, and Sarah had to find a tiny carrier in an enormous ocean with no radio guidance. She flew the reciprocal course, counting minutes, watching her fuel gauge drop toward empty. When she finally spotted the carrier, she nearly wept with relief. But landing on a pitching deck in a storm was almost as dangerous as attacking the Bismarck. She made her approach, the deck rising and falling 30 feet with each wave. Too early and she'd hit the stern, too late and she'd miss the arresting wires and crash into the barriers. She cut the throttle at what she hoped was the right moment. The swordfish dropped, hit hard, bounced, then caught an arresting wire that jerked them to a violent stop. They were down. Ground crew rushed forward to secure the aircraft. Sarah sat in the cockpit for a moment, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't unfasten her straps. Crawford had to help her. As they climbed down, Commander Hayes approached, his face grim. 12 aircraft returned, he said. 3 lost, but we got 2 torpedo hits on the Bismarck. Did we slow her down? Sarah asked, her voice hoarse. We don't know yet. The fleet is closing in. We'll know soon. In the ready room, the surviving crews gathered, stripping off wet flight gear, accepting hot tea from the stewards. Parker was there, his face pale but triumphant. He'd survived his attack run. He saw Sarah and his expression changed. Well, Mitchell, you made it back. I'm genuinely surprised. Sarah was too tired to be angry. 3 crews didn't make it back. Maybe save your commentary. I'm just saying this isn't a game. This is war, and war isn't. Isn't what, Parker? Sarah interrupted, her exhaustion turning to anger. Isn't for women. I just flew the same mission you did. I dodged the same shells. I dropped my torpedo. What exactly did you do that I didn't? Parker's jaw tightened. I've been flying combat missions for 2 years. You've been here for 2 months. And yet we're both standing here, aren't we? Sarah said quietly. We both went. We both came back. The only difference is you seem to think that means something different for me than it does for you. She walked away before he could respond. She didn't have the energy for this fight. Not now, not after what they'd just been through. That night, word came through. The torpedo hits had caused some damage, but the Bismarck was still moving. She was still heading for French ports. The British fleet was closing in, but it would be close. Too close. They would have to attack again. Sarah woke before dawn to the sound of boots on metal decks and shouted orders. She dressed in the dark, her body aching from yesterday's mission. Her hands were stiff, her shoulders screamed in protest, and she had bruises from being thrown against her harness during the violent maneuvering. None of that mattered. The Bismarck was still afloat, still dangerous, and they were the only ones who could stop her. In the briefing room, the atmosphere was different from yesterday. The men who'd mocked the swordfish were quieter now. They'd seen what those obsolete biplanes could do, and they'd seen what the Bismarck could do in return. 3 empty chairs sat at the back of the room, a reminder of the price they'd paid. Commander Hayes looked like he hadn't slept. The Bismarck took 2 torpedo hits yesterday. One did minor damage. The other hit her port side, causing some flooding, but she's still making 20 knots. That's fast enough to outrun our battleships and reach French air cover by tomorrow morning. He paused, letting that sink in. If she makes it to France, the game is over. She'll be repaired, and then she'll be back out hunting convoys. We have one more chance to slow her down. Today's attack must succeed. Sarah felt the weight of those words, must succeed. Not might, not hopefully, must. The weather has improved, Hayes continued. Which means better visibility for us, but also better visibility for German gunners. They know we're coming. They'll be ready. But we have one advantage. The Bismarck has been maneuvering hard and burning fuel. Our intelligence suggests she's running low on ammunition for her anti-aircraft guns. They can't sustain the same rate of fire they managed yesterday. Parker raised his hand. Sir, do we know what damage our torpedoes actually did? Are we sure we even hit her? Reconnaissance aircraft confirmed 2 hits, Hayes replied. But the Bismarck is the most heavily armored ship ever built. Our torpedoes aren't designed to penetrate her belt armor. We need to hit her where she's vulnerable, her rudder, her propellers, her steering gear. One lucky shot in the right place could cripple her. One lucky shot. Sarah thought about the chaos of yesterday's attack, the smoke and spray, the shells bursting all around them. Hitting a specific part of a moving ship in those conditions wasn't about skill. It was about miracle. But miracles happened. They had to believe that. After the briefing, Crawford found her on the flight deck. The sun was rising over a calmer sea, and for the first time in days, Sarah could see more than a few hundred yards. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it just meant the Germans would see them coming. How are you holding up? Crawford asked. Sarah considered lying, saying she was fine, that she was ready for anything, but Crawford deserved honesty. I'm terrified, she admitted. Yesterday was the most frightening experience of my life, and now we're going back. I know, Crawford said. But here's the thing I've learned about fear, Lieutenant. It doesn't mean you can't do the job. It just means you understand what you're risking. The men who aren't afraid, they're either lying or they're fools. What about the ones who are afraid but go anyway? Crawford smiled slightly. Those are the ones who win wars. The launch was easier today. The sea was still rough, but nothing like yesterday's storm. The 15 remaining swordfish took off in formation, circling the carrier before setting course for the Bismarck's last known position. Sarah could see for miles now. The North Atlantic stretched in every direction, gray-green water under a cloudy sky. Somewhere out there, the Bismarck was running for her life, damaged but still deadly, with the entire British fleet converging on her position. And between the fleet and the Bismarck flew 15 obsolete biplanes, the last line of defense. They spotted the battleship after an hour of flying. Even from miles away, Sarah could see she was moving slower than yesterday. Smoke trailed from her stern, and her course seemed erratic, as if her steering was compromised. Maybe yesterday's torpedoes had done more damage than they thought. Or maybe it was a trap. The squadron split up again, approaching from different angles. Sarah took the same position as yesterday, coming in low on the port side. The Bismarck's guns opened up immediately, but Crawford was right. The rate of fire was noticeably lower. They were conserving ammunition. That didn't make it safe. One shell could still blow them out of the sky. Sarah pushed the Swordfish into a shallow dive, racing toward the battleship at wave-top height. Spray from the propeller wash soaked her goggles, and she had to keep wiping them clear. The Bismarck grew larger, her massive guns tracking Sarah's approach. Then something unexpected happened. A German fighter appeared, a Messerschmitt Bf 109, sleek and deadly. It must have been launched from a French base, sent to protect the Bismarck during her final dash to safety. The fighter dove on Sarah's aircraft, guns blazing. Hayes immediately swung his gun around, returning fire, but the Lewis gun was no match for the Messerschmitt's cannon. The German fighter was so fast it overshot them, pulling up and coming around for another pass. "Stay on target," Crawford shouted. "We're almost in position." Sarah's world narrowed to a tunnel. The Bismarck ahead, the fighter behind, shells bursting all around. She couldn't think about survival. She could only think about the mission. The German pilot was good. He matched Sarah's weaving flight path, his bullets stitching the water around them. One round punched through the Swordfish's lower wing, leaving a neat hole in the fabric. 20 seconds, Crawford called. The Bismarck's side filled Sarah's vision. She could see details now, the individual guns, the lifeboats on the deck, the battle damage from previous attacks. The ship was wounded, but she was still fighting. 15 seconds. The Messerschmitt pilot lined up for a killing shot. Hayes fired a long burst, more to throw off the German's aim than with any hope of hitting him. It worked. The fighter broke off, pulling up sharply to avoid the tracer rounds. Release. The torpedo dropped, hitting the water cleanly and running straight and true toward the Bismarck's stern. Sarah didn't wait to see the impact. She yanked the Swordfish into a climbing turn, gaining altitude, trying to get away from both the battleship and the fighter. Behind her, Crawford was shouting something, but she couldn't hear over the engine noise and the wind. Then she felt him pounding on her shoulder, pointing back at the Bismarck. Sarah glanced back and saw something incredible. Their torpedo had hit, but more than that, it had struck exactly where it needed to, the Bismarck's stern, right near the rudder. The explosion threw up a massive column of water, and even from a distance, Sarah could see the battleship's stern yaw violently to port. The rudder was jammed. Other Swordfish were pressing home their attacks, and Sarah saw at least 2 more torpedoes hit. But it was that first strike, her strike, that had crippled the great ship. With her rudder jammed, the Bismarck could only sail in circles. She couldn't run. She couldn't maneuver to avoid the British battleships closing in. The celebration aboard HMS Ark Royal was muted. Yes, they had crippled the Bismarck. Yes, the British fleet was moving in for the kill. But the cost weighed heavily on everyone. 3 crews lost in the first strike, 2 more in the second. 15 men dead, their bodies somewhere in the cold Atlantic. Sarah sat in the wardroom, holding a cup of tea she couldn't taste. Around her, the other pilots were talking in quiet voices, reliving the attacks, processing what they'd done. She felt disconnected from it all, as if she were watching through glass. Commander Hayes entered and called for attention. "I've just received word from the Admiralty. At 8:47 this morning, HMS Rodney and HMS King George V engaged the Bismarck. The German ship fought back but was unable to maneuver due to her jammed rudder. After 90 minutes of bombardment, the Bismarck was sunk. Nearly all hands lost, over 2,000 men." The room fell silent. 2,000 men. Young men, probably, sailors and officers who'd been following orders just like everyone else in this war. Now they were dead, drowned, or killed in the fighting, their families not yet knowing they were widows and orphans. "What we did was necessary," Hayes continued, his voice firm. "The Bismarck had already sunk the hood. If she'd reached France and returned to action, she would have sunk more ships, killed more men, destroyed more convoys carrying food and supplies to Britain. We saved lives. Remember that." Sarah wanted to believe him. She did believe him intellectually. But emotionally, she couldn't shake the image of that massive ship disappearing beneath the waves, taking 2,000 souls with it. Later, Parker found her on the flight deck. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The sea had finally calmed, and for the first time in days, the carrier wasn't pitching and rolling. "Mitchell," Parker said, his tone different from before, less hostile, more uncertain. "Can I talk to you?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Parker was quiet for a moment, staring out at the sunset. "I owe you an apology," he finally said. "Actually, I owe you several apologies. I've been an ass." "Yes, you have," Sarah agreed. "I watched you today. I saw your attack run. That was textbook flying, straight and steady under impossible conditions. And I heard from one of the destroyer captains that your torpedo was the one that jammed the rudder. You crippled the Bismarck." Sarah shook her head. "We all did. It was a team effort." "Don't," Parker said sharply. "Don't diminish what you did. I've been doing that to you since you arrived, diminishing your accomplishments, questioning your abilities. The truth is, you're a better pilot than half the men in this squadron, maybe better than me, and I couldn't stand it because it meant I was wrong." "Wrong about what?" "About everything. About women in combat, about who belongs in a cockpit, about what makes someone brave." Parker turned to face her. "I grew up hearing that men were warriors and women were supposed to stay home and be protected. That's what my father taught me, what society taught me. And then you showed up and you were good, and it threatened everything I thought I knew." Sarah understood. She'd heard this argument her whole life, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. "So what now?" she asked. "Now I try to be better," Parker said. "And I say thank you. You helped save the fleet today. You saved lives. You did your duty, and you did it as well as anyone could have. So, thank you, Lieutenant Mitchell." He saluted her, a proper military salute, full of respect. Sarah returned it, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness, exactly. Parker's words couldn't erase months of dismissive comments and doubt, but it was a start. The next few days passed in a blur. The Ark Royal returned to port, and the crew was granted shore leave. The newspapers were full of stories about the Bismarck's destruction, and the Swordfish crews were celebrated as heroes. There were interviews and photographs and ceremonies. But something had changed for Sarah. The victory felt hollow somehow. She kept thinking about those German sailors drowning in the dark water. She kept seeing the faces of her squadron mates who hadn't come back. The cost of victory seemed too high. Her father met her at the dock, pulling her into a tight embrace. Captain Mitchell looked older than she remembered, his hair grayer, his face more lined with worry. "I heard what you did," he said quietly. "I'm so proud of you and so terrified." "I know, Dad, I'm terrified too." They walked together through the port town, past cheering crowds who wanted to shake the hands of the pilots who'd killed the Bismarck. Sarah smiled and nodded, but she felt like a fraud. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd survived when others hadn't. "Your mother wants you to come home," her father said. "She wants you to request a transfer to a training position somewhere safer. She's been beside herself with worry." "And what do you want?" Captain Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. "I want you safe, but I also know you wouldn't respect yourself if you ran away from this. You chose this path, Sarah. You fought for the right to serve in combat. Now you have to decide if you can live with what that means." That night, Sarah lay in a real bed for the first time in months, staring at the ceiling. She thought about her mother's fears and her father's pride. She thought about Parker's apology and Commander Hayes's assurances that they'd done the right thing. She thought about Crawford's steady presence and young Hayes's enthusiasm. Most of all, she thought about the moment when her torpedo had struck the Bismarck's rudder. That one perfect shot that had changed everything. That one moment of success in the midst of chaos. Was it worth it? Had it been worth the risk, the fear, the cost? She didn't have an answer. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't done. The war was far from over. There would be more missions, more dangers, more chances to prove herself. And despite everything, despite the fear and the doubt and the cost, she would be there. Because someone had to be. Part 5, The Truth Beneath the Waves. 3 months after the Bismarck's sinking, Sarah received an unusual summons. She was to report to the Admiralty in London for a classified debriefing. No explanation was given, just orders to appear. She traveled by train, watching the English countryside roll past. Summer had arrived, bringing warmth and green fields, though the war had left its marks everywhere. Bomb craters pocked the landscape near cities, and military convoys crowded the roads. At the Admiralty building, Sarah was led through corridors of power. past offices where decisions affecting millions of lives were made every day. She felt small and insignificant in her lieutenant's uniform, surrounded by senior officers wearing enough medals to weigh them down. A secretary showed her into a wood-paneled office where 3 men waited. One was Commander Hayes. The other 2 she didn't recognize, though their rank insignia marked them as very senior intelligence officers. "Lieutenant Mitchell," the older of the 2 strangers said. "I'm Captain Shepard, Naval Intelligence. Thank you for coming. Please sit." Sarah sat, her mind racing. Why would intelligence want to talk to her about the Bismarck? That mission was over, done, celebrated. What more could there be? "We need to discuss something sensitive," Shepard continued. "Something that hasn't been made public and probably never will be. It concerns the Bismarck operation, specifically your torpedo attack." "Sir, I don't understand. My report was filed months ago. Everything was documented." The second officer, a thin man with cold eyes, spoke up. "Your report was accurate, Lieutenant, but it was incomplete, because you couldn't have known what your torpedo really did." Sarah looked at Commander Hayes, confused. He nodded encouragingly. "It's all right, you can speak freely here. This is about recognition, not punishment." Shepard opened a folder on his desk. "We've been analyzing the Bismarck's wreckage, interviewing the German survivors, piecing together exactly what happened in those final hours, and we've discovered something remarkable." He pulled out several photographs, underwater images of the sunken battleship, taken by divers at considerable risk. Sarah could see the massive hull, tilted on the ocean floor, torn and broken by the British fleet's guns. "Your torpedo," Shepard said, pointing to one image, "struck here at the junction between the rudder mechanism and the stern armor. It wasn't just that you hit the rudder, Lieutenant. You hit the one vulnerable point in the Bismarck's entire steering system, a design flaw the Germans didn't even know existed." He pulled out more documents, technical drawings, engineering reports. The Bismarck's designers had made her nearly invincible from the side, but they'd overlooked this weak point in the stern. Your torpedo struck at the precise angle needed to jam the steering gear beyond any hope of repair. If you'd hit 6 inches higher or lower, the damage would have been manageable, but you hit exactly where it counted. Sarah stared at the documents, not fully processing what she was hearing. "Are you saying it was luck, that I just happened to hit the right spot?" "Not luck," the thin officer said. "Skill, your attack approach, your angle of descent, the timing of your release, all of it combined to put that torpedo exactly where it needed to be. You flew through hell, kept your aircraft steady under impossible conditions, and delivered a perfect shot." "But I didn't know about any weak point. None of us did." "Of course not," Shepard agreed. "But that doesn't diminish what you accomplished. The fact is, Lieutenant Mitchell, you're the one who stopped the Bismarck. The other torpedo hits helped, certainly. The fleet's guns finished her off, but without your strike jamming that rudder, she would have reached France. She would have been repaired. She would have killed again." Sarah felt overwhelmed. For months, she'd carried the weight of that mission, the fear, the cost, the deaths of those German sailors. She'd told herself it was necessary, that they'd saved lives, but she'd never quite believed it. Now these men were telling her it was all because of one shot she'd fired. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked quietly. Shepard exchanged glances with his colleague. "2 reasons. First, because it's the truth and you deserve to know it. Second, because we need you to understand your value to this war effort." He pulled out another document, orders, Sarah realized. "You're being reassigned. We're establishing a new training program for torpedo bombers, incorporating lessons learned from the Bismarck operation. We want you to lead it." Sarah's head snapped up. "Lead it, sir, I'm just a lieutenant, and I'm—" "A woman," the thin officer said. "Yes, we're aware. That's precisely why this matters. The Americans are joining the war. They're building their own aircraft carriers, training their own pilots. They need to learn what works and what doesn't. And they need to learn it from someone who's actually done it, someone who's proven that skill and courage matter more than gender. This is a chance to shape the future of naval aviation," Commander Hayes added. "To ensure that future pilots, male or female, get the training they need to survive and succeed. Your knowledge, your experience, your success against the Bismarck, all of that could save countless lives." Sarah looked at the orders, her mind spinning. This was everything she'd fought for: recognition, respect, a chance to make a real difference. But it also meant leaving her squadron, leaving the friends she'd made, leaving the war itself in some ways. "I need time to think about it," she said. Take all the time you need, Shepard replied. Within reason, of course, we'd like your decision by Monday. Sarah left the Admiralty building and walked through London, barely noticing the bomb damage and the crowds. She walked for hours, processing everything she'd learned. She'd stopped the Bismarck, not the squadron, not the fleet, her. That one torpedo, that one moment of skill and courage under fire had changed the course of the battle. It was almost too much to comprehend. But more than that, she now had a choice. She could stay in combat, keep risking her life on missions like the Bismarck strike. Or she could step back, use her experience to train others, potentially save more lives through teaching than she ever could through fighting. That evening, she found Parker at a pub near the base. He was surprised to see her but welcomed her to his table. Their relationship had changed since his apology, not quite friendship, but something like mutual respect. "I hear you're up for a big assignment," Parker said. "Word travels fast in the Fleet Air Arm." "How do you know about that?" "I don't know the details, but I know you met with intelligence today. That usually means something important." He paused. "Are you leaving the squadron?" Sarah told him about the training program, about what they'd discovered regarding her torpedo strike. Parker listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You should take it." "Just like that, you don't think I'm running away?" "Running away?" Parker laughed, but there was no mockery in it. "Mitchell, you flew an obsolete biplane into hell and crippled the most powerful warship ever built. Nobody could ever accuse you of running away. But this is a chance to matter beyond just one mission. This is a chance to change the whole war." "But the squadron needs pilots. The war isn't over." "The squadron will get more pilots," Parker said firmly. "Young, eager kids who don't know the first thing about attacking a warship. They'll fly out there full of confidence and patriotism, and half of them will die because nobody taught them properly. Unless someone who's actually done it shows them how to survive." He leaned forward. "You've proven yourself, Mitchell. You don't need to keep proving it. But those kids who are coming up behind us, they need you. They need someone who can teach them not just how to drop a torpedo, but how to face their fear, how to handle the doubt, how to keep flying when everything in them wants to turn back." Sarah realized he was right. She'd spent so long fighting to be accepted, to prove she belonged, that she'd lost sight of what came next. She'd won her battle. Now it was time to help others win theirs. "When did you get so wise?" she asked. Parker grinned. "I learned from the best, a stubborn female pilot who wouldn't take no for an answer." On Monday, Sarah accepted the assignment. She would lead the new training program, sharing everything she'd learned over the Bismarck's dark waters. She would teach new pilots, men and women both, how to survive, how to succeed, how to face impossible odds with skill and courage. But first, she asked for one more mission with her squadron. One last flight with Crawford and Hayes, one final chance to feel the wind in her face and the swordfish's controls in her hands. Commander Hayes approved it. A reconnaissance flight over the Atlantic looking for U-boats. It was almost peaceful compared to the Bismarck strike. They flew through clear skies, the ocean spread out beneath them like hammered metal, and for a few hours, Sarah could simply fly. As they returned to the carrier, Crawford tapped her shoulder and pointed down. Sarah looked and saw something that made her smile, a pod of dolphins racing alongside their shadow on the water. "Good luck, Charm," Crawford called out. "The old sailors say dolphins mean safe passage." Sarah thought about everything she'd been through, everything she'd learned. The fear and the doubt, the mockery and the respect, the terror of combat and the weight of success. She thought about the path that had led her here and the path that stretched ahead. She'd started this journey fighting to prove herself. She'd faced men who said she didn't belong, who claimed women couldn't handle the stress of combat. She'd been mocked, dismissed, underestimated. And then she'd flown through hell, delivered the shot that crippled the Bismarck and changed the course of the war. But the real victory wasn't that one torpedo strike. The real victory was what came after, the recognition, the respect, the opportunity to shape the future. She'd kicked down a door that others could walk through. She'd proven that courage and skill had nothing to do with gender. The Bismarck had been called unsinkable. The swordfish had been called obsolete. She'd been called unfit for combat. All three had been underestimated, and all three had proven the doubters wrong. As the carrier came into view, Sarah allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. She'd done what she set out to do. She'd served her country with honor. She'd saved lives and changed minds. Now it was time to help others do the same. The swordfish touched down on the carrier deck one last time, and Sarah climbed out of the cockpit to face her future. Behind her was the past, the fear, the fight, the flying. Ahead of her was something even more important, the chance to ensure that future pilots, regardless of who they were, would have the training and respect they deserved. The Germans had mocked Britain's obsolete biplane. But one torpedo, delivered by a woman they would have dismissed, had sent their greatest battleship to the bottom of the sea. Sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't the newest or the biggest. Sometimes they're the ones nobody sees coming. The END retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Sonnet 4.5.